Hello and welcome to Activist TV Volume 5. I'm here in the Collingwood Children's Farm with Emily Reeves from World Society for the Protection of Animals, and we're going to have a little interview here to talk about the upcoming campaign called the Humane Chain. Emily, welcome to Activist TV.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
Our first real live guest. Now, this is going to be totally unedited. I'm going to open up to the questions.
Okay.
So, live sheep export. What is it? What does it mean?
Camera?
You can talk to me, the camera,
Okay.
to the kids out there.
The kids out there. Australia is the largest exporter of animals for slaughter, and this means that we send millions of animals every year from Australian shores over to either the Middle East or to Southeast Asia, so that those animals can be slaughtered when they arrive for consumption in those importing countries. We send around 4 million sheep alone to the Middle East.
4 million sheep a year.
This is right. Every year is approximately 4 million sheep, and of those 4 million, we have about a 1% death rate, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 4 million animals, we're looking at around 40,000 dying just on the journey to the Middle East. That's before the ship even arrives in the importing countries.
Crikey.
Yeah.
Are there any other animals, or is it just sheep?
We also export cows and goats for slaughter, but there are smaller numbers of cows. Around 800, 900,000 cows go, and they're generally to Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And the sheep is just enormous numbers.
So the main problem is sheep export, and it's kind of one animal welfare problem that's really, we have the responsibility to fix this problem. It's not like, say, orangutans where, you know, it's hard to deal with other governments and stuff like that. It's our government can do something about this, can't it?
That's exactly right. Live export is one of Australia's biggest animal welfare problems, and the control sits with our government and our industry to make these changes to protect Australian animals.
So why is it a cruel and inhumane process? Like the campaign talks about, you know, it's cruel, it's inhumane and it's unnecessary. Why is it cruel and inhumane?
Well, from the moment that the sheep leave the farm gate to the point where they're actually slaughtered in their destination, they suffer from stress, injury, heat and all sorts of issues like that. If you look at where a sheep would normally live, it's in a paddock, it's eating grass. Once it enters the live export trade, it first undergoes a journey on a truck, which can be up to 2 days to get to an export port. They spend about 4 days trying to get used to a pellet food, because once they're on the ships, all that the sheep are fed are pellets, and most sheep, they're used to grass, they're not used to eating the pellets, so some don't even recognise that it's food. So they have 4 days to learn to go from grass to the pelleted foods.
So straight up, the first thing is they're made to change their food. So imagine if you're used to eating pasta like I am, and then, you know, suddenly you're switched to something that you don't even like, not even ever had before, like sushi or something crazy. You know, it's a big difference, is it?
That's right. And then the diet changes completely.
Yeah.
They're not substituted with grass or anything like that.
Okay.
And so then for the 3 weeks that the animal is on the ship, all they have is that pelleted food. And the live export industry even admits that they can't tell whether an animal has eaten or not. Like particularly a sheep, I mean, they've got wool, their body shape doesn't change necessarily, and they can't tell that the sheep hasn't eaten until they die.
Okay. Next question. Do you have a lot of evidence that this is like a cruel process, or is it just hearsay? Like, what's the evidence?
Unfortunately, there are just there's mounds of evidence. Firstly, in terms of industry statistics about how many sheep die on the way, they are forced to keep records of how many die during the journeys, and we are talking about tens of thousands every single year. But then once the sheep are offloaded in the Middle East, there is just reams and reams of video footage and photos of animals being treated in the most appalling conditions, and this evidence has been collected over years in numerous different countries. So year after year we've got people working on this campaign and never giving up, but year after year we're still able to document, despite how much the industry or government says the trade is improving, we can still document this horrendous cruelty. And this is why we are saying that the only way to protect Australian animals is not to improve the trade but to end it.
Why do people in the Middle East like their meat imported alive?
Well, there has been a demand, which fortunately is starting to change, a demand for being able to slaughter their own animal. And of course in the Middle East, due to religion, halal slaughter is really important.
Do you want to explain a little bit about what halal means?
Halal slaughter is done in accordance with Islamic teachings. So it is meant to be a humane way to slaughter an animal with a sharp knife, causing minimal pain. There are a number of issues with this. Firstly is that a lot of the slaughter that we see in the Middle East is not halal. The animals will have their legs bound, which is against the teachings. The knives aren't necessarily sharp, and so we see a horrible slaughter which is not halal, and it's really inhumane. Secondly, the important thing to know, which is not necessarily recognised in the Middle East, is that we
just got a sheep knocking the camera tripod over. Hi, little sheep guy.
You just want to be part of it all, don't you?
Let's see if you can see that. Hey, sheepy. Thanks for being in the middle of our shoot. So this is all live activist TV here in the Collingwood Children's Farm. If you haven't been before, it's really great. You can see all these sheep. Sorry to interrupt the really important thing we were saying about halal. I just thought it's nice to give people a look at what's happening. And the sheep are a part of this film as well, which is great.
The number one part.
Okay. Hello again. So we're talking about halal, and the trend is changing.
This is right. You've got young people in the Middle East, like say someone who's my age, early 30s, I'd like to say I was 20, but early 30s, let's say. She finishes work, she's worked 9 to 5, 9 to 6, she's coming home, she needs to cook family for dinner. What did I say? Sorry, I'm not
she's cooking. She's cooking for the family meal.
For the family. The last thing she wants to do is go and grab a live sheep, take it home and slaughter it at her house. You know, she wants to go to the supermarket, like we all do, grab the packaged meat, take it home, cook it up. She feeds her family, and this meat is from animals that have been slaughtered humanely in Australia. And the important thing to realise is that Australia already exports halal accredited meat. So this is meat that is fine for Muslims to eat, but it comes from animals that are slaughtered in accordance with our legislation here in Australia, which means that these animals are given protection.
Okay, so could it be like a really big export earner? Is the reason why, you know, live animal exports continues is that, you know, it's really big for our economy, and if we stopped it, it would ruin, you know, farming communities.
Well, this is an interesting thing that the live export industry says. Like, if live exports were to end overnight, then the whole world would basically fall apart, which is simply not true. What we're advocating for, though, is a phase out. We know that if something was to stop suddenly, obviously there are people who make their livelihoods from this trade, and we want as much as possible for farmers to have someone to purchase their sheep so they continue with their livelihoods, and that people in the processing industry can create more jobs. Now, it's been interesting with this campaign. One of our closest allies is the Meat Workers Union and the domestic processing industry, because what we've seen since the live export industry started to grow is that jobs in the domestic meat processing industry have been lost. We've seen abattoirs closing because they can't get enough sheep to fill the demand, and we've seen shifts reducing, and this means that people in rural and regional communities are losing their jobs. That impacts on individuals and impacts on the community.